Hey everyone, I just finished designing and making this wall sign for the owners of the Baseball Bed and Breakfast up in Cooperstown, New York. It was a fun project and I documented the entire thing on video, so have a look.
I designed the baseball script lettering by hand and set up the sign using Inkscape, an open source vector design software. But this video isn't about logo design or type design. This is all about the build. For this project, I chose to work with 1/4 inch MDF for a few reasons. First of all, I had some lying around. Second of all, it's super smooth and uniform. And thirdly, it's pretty durable, especially if you're using it indoors away from moisture. Okay, I have all my lines marked off, so it's time to make some sawdust. When you're working with a circular saw like this, I think it goes without saying, take time to line up your cuts carefully and use a straight edge. And of course, measure twice, cut once. I cut out these additional strips to affix to the back of the sign around the edge to increase the thickness, because any hardware I use that's longer than 1/4 inch would poke through the front. Alright, with all the pieces cut out, it was time to move inside to the shop and start gluing them up. Sorry for the poor lighting in here, but it is a basement. I chose to use brads to hold the strips to the back of the sign while the glue set up. I've had this brad nailer for a while, but I hadn't used it until now, so I didn't realize that the warning label was still wrapped around the trigger, but I was about to find out in 3, 2, 1. Oh yeah. Fortunately, the only thing that was damaged was my ego. The brads I was using were 5/8 of an inch long, which meant they were sticking out the back of the sign and the tips needed to be ground off. Yes, I know what you're thinking. The angle grinder is overkill. A Dremel would have been safer and easier to manage. But I'm a firm believer that the best tool for the job is the tool you're actually going to use. The grinder was right there at hand, it was way faster and easier to set up than the Dremel, so I just went for it. And besides, let's face it, the grinder is just way manlier. And no, I wasn't working near any oily rags or heaps of sawdust. The next step was to bevel the edges of home plate, which I did using my router and a chamfer bit. For small projects like this, I prefer to work on a router table rather than putting a router directly on the workpiece. In my opinion, it's easier, more manageable, safer, and it yields a cleaner result. I was almost ready to paint here, but I still needed to do some prep. I sanded the face of the sign with 150 grit paper, and then went around the edges using the same paper with a wood block to make sure that the edges were nice and crisp and clean. MDF is a very smooth, very finished material, and that's actually part of the problem. If you don't scuff it up a little bit, paint doesn't necessarily want to adhere. It was finally time to paint. I used a regular interior latex house paint, satin finish, which I find works really well with the calendared vinyl I use to make my decals. MDF is a porous, thirsty material. I ended up putting 3 coats of paint on the sign. The first coat essentially seals the MDF, the second coat covers, and then the third coat is there for durability. I didn't record this part, but once the white was dry, I masked the face of the sign and spray painted the edges a flat black. I used spray paint because, well, it's what I had. With the painting done, it was time to get the graphics ready for application. The design was a 3-color layout, and since I'm working with solid color vinyl, I have to cut, weed, and apply each color individually. So while I let the video run, I should probably explain why I was doing this project in the first place. Back in August, my son and I took a father-son trip up to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. It was a birthday surprise for him, and since my birthday's a month after his, it was kind of a combined present from my wife. She planned the whole thing out, and she found a small bed and breakfast about 3 or 4 blocks from the Hall of Fame Museum, right in the heart of Cooperstown. The name of the place is the Baseball Bed and Breakfast, and the entire house is decorated with baseball memorabilia, old photographs, lots of nostalgia, and each guest room in the house is named and themed for one of the original Baseball Hall of Famers. My son and I stayed in the Christy Mathewson room. It was a beautiful home, but what was nicer than the decorations and everything were the people who owned the place. John and Suzanne Rudy, the sweetest people you'll ever want to meet, and they welcomed us with open arms. They let us hang out with them in the evening, watch Yankee games, which was fantastic. They drove us into town to the museum so we could leave our car behind. They were just very gracious and very warm and very inviting. Despite all the wonderful memorabilia and photographs they had throughout the home, the one thing they didn't have was something special showcasing their business. People who are that nice and that generous really deserve to have something to celebrate them. I took it upon myself to create this, and I'm sending it to them as a surprise. They don't know I'm doing this. After copious amounts of weeding, it was finally time to put some transfer tape on the decals and get them onto the sign. I applied the decals dry, using the hinge method. It's a pretty simple, straightforward process. I will say this, however, when you apply decals dry, you only get one shot at it. Before you commit, make sure you have your graphic aligned and level and positioned exactly where you want it. Once you have it where you want it, hold it down with some blue tape or some masking tape, then peel back the backing and apply. Centering the red lettering inside the black drop shadow was a little tricky, but I was able to see the black well enough through the backer and the transfer mask. If you're doing multi-layer applications like this, you can always use registration marks. There's also a hack that makes this easier, using ordinary parchment paper from your kitchen. If you're interested in that, leave a comment below. I can do a video on that another time. The important thing to remember when removing the transfer mask is to peel it straight back on itself. The last piece of transfer tape comes off, and we have a completed sign.
This was a fun build. As a finishing touch, I included a personal thank you note on the back, along with a photo of me and my son with Miss Suzanne, one of the owners of the bed and breakfast. So, John and Suzanne Rudy, thank you very much for your wonderful hospitality. This sign is on its way up to you in Cooperstown. We enjoyed staying with you, and we hope that we get to do it again in the future. Thanks so much.